You guys will go ahead and have a seat. We'll get started here. I'm Phil Logston with Lochner. I'm your moderator today, so you can see me for about 30 seconds while I introduce Scott and Ben. So Scott Schurman is with Division of Environmental Analysis, worked with Scott for a long time. And Dr. Ben Blandford is at the Kentucky Transportation Center, AUK, and together they're going to talk about transportation resiliency in Kentucky. So Scott, I understand you're going first.
That's correct. Let's start it. Good morning, everybody. My name is Scott Schurman. I'm with the Transportation Cabinet. I'm an environmental scientist with the Division of Environmental Analysis. And Dr. Blandford and myself are here to talk to you about transportation resiliency in Kentucky and some of the activities that we've been involved with. All right. Dr. Blandford and myself have been involved with doing some research studies on climate change and extreme weather. And they present a significant and growing risk to our transportation infrastructure, to the safety and reliability of it, and also for the sustainability of our transportation assets for just normal operations, to move freight and to move people back and forth to where they need to get to. And these extreme weather events and climate change have been disrupting those operations. The impacts of climate change and extreme weather are affecting our systems and are expecting to intensify. As you can see by the map here in the corner, this comes out of the National Climate Assessment. And it depicts the percent of change in days where we're going to receive greater than 1 inch of precipitation on any given day. And as you can see, Kentucky, it shows anywhere from 20 to 30% increase in those number of days that are going to occur here in the future. Transportation infrastructure is designed to handle a wide range of impacts, right? But those impacts are based on historic data and not on future climatic data, future climate circumstances that are supposed to occur. And preparing for the climate change and extreme weather events is critical, as has been demonstrated here over the past few years. Some of the events that we've encountered recently here about 5 weeks ago in eastern Kentucky was a really historic flooding event. And just an overview of Kentucky and what we have here. We have over 90,000 miles of streams and 13 major river basins. So as you can see, we're very prone to flooding and very prone to the impacts of drainage of the water and excess water. We have the second most navigable waterways behind Alaska. So we have quite a few waterways that we have to deal with. Here are some pictures of some flooding that has occurred here in the Commonwealth over the past 10 years or so. Also, Kentucky has a large amount of karst areas that we have to deal with. Sinkholes and karst subsidence, those are things that we deal with on a regular basis, especially in the western part of the state and the central part of the state. There's some pictures here. One of them is a Corvette museum there in the lower left corner, so basically the lower right corner. And also the state is very susceptible to landslides, rock falls and slips. And this is this depiction is comes from KGS. It's a landslide susceptibility map that they've created. Also, they've just done some really good studies, and we've worked with them also, trying to integrate their data in with some of our vulnerability studies. And they've done some really good research here recently in the Big Sandy area to do some enhanced vulnerability studies as far as rock slides and rock falls go. And there's some more pictures that we have of that. And also one of the other major natural hazards that we have to deal with here in Kentucky is seismic. We have one of the largest faults in the United States, to our western part of the state, the New Madrid seismic zone, New Madrid fault. We did a vulnerability study a few years back and did some research on that and integrated, the vulnerability to our highway systems to seismic activity. Talking to geologists during that time, there's kind of two fields of thought with the New Madrid fault right now. Some geologists feel that and think that the fault has gone dead, it has gone quiet, and is no longer an active fault. And other geologists are in the other field of that it is an active fault, that is something that has not gone silent or is no longer an active fault. They definitely feel that it is an active fault. I think some of the former people in the group that think that it has gone silent, a lot of that has just been due to the fact that we don't have the number of minor earthquakes that we did in the past. And also really the major, anything over 5 over the Richter scale hasn't occurred since 1895. So it's really unclear, what the future holds. All we can go with is what the USGS tells us and what their vulnerability maps tell us, and overlay that against our transportation assets and come up with some sort of vulnerability for those assets in those high seismic vulnerable areas. One of the research projects that was involved with the Transportation Center is we did a vulnerability study back in 2016 and 2017 of the National Highway System. We went to all 12 districts. We held meetings with district personnel. We identified vulnerable resources, whether they were bridges, with roadways, structures, whatever transportation assets that we had in the area. I had those identified by district personnel, and we laid maps out in front of them to have them identify critical areas, areas that are reoccurring to them for problems, whatever it may be, whether it's flooding, landslides, reoccurring sinkholes, and we had them identify that. And then we basically came up with a vulnerability rating, and we rated each one of those highway segments based on it was a combination of things. What type of roadway damage was occurring, the frequency of the roadway occurring, the nature of the roadway too, whether it was a rural roadway or whether it was a high ADT route. And then we came up with a vulnerability rating based on that. I'll finish my segment up here and turn it over to Ben. One of the other projects that we were involved with was a federal highway pilot project. We were one of five other states to be awarded this project. And basically we looked at extreme weather events, the impact to our infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure, and the impacts to our asset management practices. The project that we did here in Kentucky, we focused in on a couple of different areas. As we went through our primary vulnerability report back in 2016, it was obvious that the two major players here in Kentucky are extreme precipitation events and extreme heat. Those are really the two that could have a really potential impact on our transportation resources. So we looked specifically at two classes of transportation assets. We looked at bridges and pavements. For bridges, we came up with a bridge sensitivity index, which basically looked at a whole litany of things. It looked at a criticality value. It looked at a geomorphic value. It looked at a bridge condition value. And basically, there were different factors that went into those values. We assigned a vulnerability rating based on that. And then we came up with a sensitivity index, a sensitivity rating for over 10,000 bridges that KYTC maintains and is responsible for here in the state. And we also modeled the effects of warm weather, the increase of extreme heat events. And we specifically looked at the effects of that extreme heat on pavements and pavement performance, specifically in the Bowling Green areas. We looked at climate data and the climate projection data. It was clear to us that the Bowling Green area was going to experience more increased events in extreme heat and longer duration of extreme heat. So we looked at the pavement performance in that area, specifically on I-65. And really the results of that told us at the time that our design standards were adequate to withstand the increased heat events that are supposed to occur here in the future. Obviously, we'll have to take a look at that as new climate data comes out. We will reassess that as that comes out, and we can take a look at future performance as we get that data available to us. And then also we looked at resiliency related process improvements because it was obvious as we went through the process and as we went through putting all this together for the vulnerability reports and for the asset management project for federal highways. There were a lot of players. There were a lot of players involved. We found that it really affects the major divisions of KYTC. So there's a lot of players involved. There's a lot of moving parts from maintenance to the state highway engineer's office to DEA to design, that it touches a lot of different people. So we realized that it was necessary for us to bring all those different players into different meetings, and we've done that with some working groups, and Ben will talk about that also, and some of the additional process improvements that we made for tracking for ER events specifically. And as you can see here, and I'm going to turn this over to Ben, over the past 5 years, we've averaged, on average, this isn't including what happened here about 5 weeks ago out in eastern Kentucky. We averaged anywhere from 200 to 300 sites a year. And this is just federal highways reimbursement ER sites. This doesn't include our FEMA sites. We average anywhere from $25 to $30 million in ER costs. And also we have new regulations that have come about here in the last few years that make us track the ER events, and specifically duplicate ER events. If we have a roadway or a structure that has been damaged more than once, Federal Highways is now requiring us to take a look at mitigation alternatives, a betterment alternative, something in just us going back and building the roadway or the bridge back in time. That we look at some sort of mitigative alternative. That mitigative alternative may not be cost effective, right? It may be so cost prohibitive that it's not worth us building that alternative, but at least it's something that we've looked at and addressed in the design process. So that's one of the process improvements that we worked on. I think at this point I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and he can talk a little bit further about some of the other process improvements and some of the other activities that Ben and I have been involved with here in the last year or so. I'll turn it over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Scott. Just we're going to try to set this up to where we leave some time at the end for open discussion. I'm glad we've got a big audience here. Obviously, there's been a lot going on in Kentucky in the last 12 months involving extreme weather, and I'd like to get some of your own perspectives on that. You know, there's a lot of problems we are facing, and we don't have any clear answers. So, love to get as much discussion as we can here. Try to leave at least 10 minutes for that at the end. So I think Scott mentioned the map here. This is one of the things we've worked on. It's a ER database, geodatabase. The database includes both the damage on the federal aid routes, and those, you know, ER processes that goes to federal highways, and the ones that are not on the federal aid system, those go to FEMA. They're two totally different processes, totally different amount of paperwork, different tracking. I know it's a lot to handle, it's a lot to cover, and so we've just been trying to compile it as best we can so we can track it going forward. I think we went back to 2009, Scott. And obviously, the closer we get to now, the more complete data we have. But we have over, I want to say, 4,000 documented sites now that we've identified that have had to be repaired due to extreme weather since 2009. Okay, so some of the other activities going on, this is stuff that, you know, we're more, not necessarily Scott and I are doing, but we're aware of, we're informing, you know, based off our work, other things like Cabinet is doing to try to get this ball rolling towards more better resiliency. One of them was the Transportation Asset Management Plan, or the TAMP. This is a federal requirement now. All states must submit these every 4 years. The first was in 2018. So the next one will come out later this year. Part of the TAMP is a section on risk-based asset management planning, and extreme weather is one of the risks that needs to be included as part of that risk-based asset management planning. When Scott mentioned that pilot project we did earlier with federal highways, part of that, the goal there was to, you know, this is a new field here, asset management planning, and then bringing extreme weather and how's that going to affect the life cycle of assets. Nobody necessarily has all the answers to this right now. So the whole goal of the pilot project was to start getting states thinking about this, start developing new processes, new methodologies for trying to account for this. The second one there, first look. So this is, we're work closely with the GIS group and the Transportation Cabinet, Will Holmes in this group. They've developed an app called First Look, and this is for responders and anyone in the field. When it can be ER related, weather related, it could be any kind of incident. But the idea is to have an app on your phone to where, you know, you can quickly, you know, log it, account for it, get it, and then once you account for that, you send it up and send emails to anyone who needs to know about this incident. And it's a great way to get, you know, for emergency response, it's a great way to get that ball rolling and get all the necessary parties aware and on the same page and responding. And so this is, I think it's undergoing field testing right now, but the goal is, I think, pretty soon to deploy it agency-wide within the cabinet. The third one there, the Resiliency Working Group, Federal Highways, Bernadette DuPont in Kentucky has led the development of this Resiliency Working Group, I think for about the last year and a half, meeting, you know, every 3 or 4 months. That's because of COVID, of course, meeting virtually, but it's been very well attended. We've had some really great discussions. I'm excited to have that going. It's multi-agency. It's got cabinet personnel. It's got academic folks like myself. It's got NPO folks. It's got other state agencies. But it's really exciting to see all these people come together and discussing these big issues. And then the last one here, the incorporation of resiliency metrics into SHIFT and other asset management project prioritization. This is something that Tracy Novacek has taken on to really pull these metrics, update what we're doing, and just have this as part of the decision-making process. Okay, so this slide is more about sort of where we are now and where we're wanting to go here in the next couple of years. So the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, or the bill, it's I see it referred to a lot, the new transportation bill that was passed in the last year. There's a pretty heavy emphasis on resiliency in the bill. Repair and rebuild roads and bridges focus on climate change, mitigation, resilience, equity, and safety for all users. There are specific funding programs in place for resiliency. Some formula programs and discretionary programs. Part of that is the state or the federal highways wants states to develop a resiliency improvement plan. And they just in about a month ago released guidance on what that means, what should be in a resilience improvement plan. So we're kind of going through that now, starting to assess what that means for Kentucky, and that's something we're going to be working on for the transportation cabinet over the next year or two. You know, that the idea of the resiliency plan enhance the capabilities to plan for, absorb, recover, and more successfully adapt to extreme weather. We know it's coming, we see it coming, it's becoming more frequent. So what can we do about it? Okay, so that's kind of the end of what we're doing, what we have done, and I kind of want to shift the discussion to, you know, what's been going on in the state last year. Obviously, we know about these big events. In December last year, 2021, Western Kentucky, really awful tornado outbreak, destroyed 15,000 buildings and trailer homes, 93 fatalities from the events, 70 plus in Kentucky, 3.5 to 5 billion estimated damages, which is just an astronomical number. You know, I think I've heard different things about it being if not the longest track, one of the longest track EF4 and EF5 tornadoes ever documented in the United States. Started in Arkansas, went through Tennessee, but spent most of its time, unfortunately, in Kentucky. I don't feel like I need to tell you all too much about this, because I'm sure you already know, and probably many of you know more than I do about it. And then the other major event, as Scott alluded to just a few weeks ago in Eastern Kentucky in July. According to National Weather Service, upwards of 14 to 16 inches of rain fell during a 5-day period. In a narrow swath, and many other locations, a much wider area experienced 6 to 10 inches of rain. As you know, that's not a good thing for Eastern. It's not a good thing for anyone, but in particular Eastern Kentucky with the topography. That's, you know, it's a very dangerous situation. So the flash flooding led to, I think the last time we saw the count was 39 deaths, widespread catastrophic damage, over 600 helicopter rescues. From a transportation perspective, more than 100 bridges were damaged or destroyed. And I saw this quote, so I included it in there. Just sometimes you try to, you know, account in statistics what happened, but it's hard to. Statistics don't tell the whole story. So this quote from Sheriff Joe Engel: "The storm totally annihilated Perry County's infrastructure, water, telephone, internet, electricity, all the basic roads, all the basic things you would build a community around just disappeared. There's a big swath of the county that's totally isolated. The state highways are just totally gone." You got to pick a couple pictures there. So basically what I want to do at this point, we got a lot of people here. That's great. I've got a few questions that I'm going to use as prompts, but really I'd love to hear from you all, get your all's perspective on this. So the first one here. Of people in this room, how many of you were directly impacted by either the tornadoes in western Kentucky or the flooding in eastern Kentucky? Was anyone here directly impacted by any of those? One person in the back. Western or eastern Kentucky? Bowling Green? Yeah, I was driving down I-65 and I can still see some of the damage. The houses along there. How many of you had family or friends impacted by either the tornadoes or flooding? Now, you got a lot more people, it's like about half the room. How many of you were involved in the response or recovery of either of the disasters? Okay, so a lot of you all have, I wasn't personally affected. I did not have friends or family, unfortunately, in that regard. So a lot of you all know more about this than I do. That's great. I'd love to hear. I want to get some of your perspectives on this. So what do you all think? What, if anything, can we do to lessen the impacts of these extreme weather events? Does anybody have any ideas, from a transportation perspective? Anything we can be, should be doing? Yes.
I was looking at the picture of the road that part of it was washed out, and that kind of spoke to me because it seems like maybe we could build more like drains underneath the roads in the areas where that's happened before, because we now know it's been known to happen there. Although at the same time, I don't know if that would potentially increase the cost for maintenance of the area, keeping the drain cleared, but I mean, at least it'd be something, right?
Yeah, and that's, it's part of the goal of what we're doing with the ER database, is just to have a centralized repository for all the data where we know damage has occurred. And, if there's repeat damage occurring, then maybe we need to try to think about how can we do it differently so that we don't have to keep fixing it over and over.
But one of the things we run into, I'll sit in meetings, design meetings, and there'll be a problem with the roadways flooding, but no one can tell exactly where the high water mark is, right, during the greatest flood event. And to me, that should be known, right?
Wow.
And that's something Division of Water is working on, starting to document those high water marks during these instances. So that to me is something that the cabinet can tap into. Those have been documented, wherever the roadway or structure that we've had problems in the past, and we have to know that information to get baseline information to have. So.
Yes.
Someone on Team for the chat says to meet people out of the area. So I don't know if that's maybe like a right away process or what exactly they mean, but that was a suggestion that was was to move people out of like vulnerable areas over time. And some of that extends obviously outside of transportation, but when obviously there's not all kinds of options for variety of purposes, but something suggested.
So, and where the topography is very, the slope is severe. That much water falls, obviously, it falls quickly, it drains quickly, it collects quickly, and it moves quickly across the land. We've got this resiliency improvement plan. It's one thing to look back and see, here's where we're vulnerable, here's where damage is occurring. It's a different thing to look forward and say, here's what we can do to address the situation. So, yes.
Yeah, I'm interested in your discussion. I don't know if Tracy's here or not, but discussion you had with her about including resiliency as a factor in future project funding like SHIP. And I'm wondering, you hear about something like, after New Orleans, after that disaster, you hear people say, sometimes flippantly, unfortunately, well, you shouldn't build there if it's, gonna be a problem. Is that same thing going to be true for highway improvements, where we're going to try to build and improve highways that are more resilient?
I think the factor comes back to cost, right? You have to have a cost benefit analysis, especially when you're going to spend millions of dollars, right? You're not going to spend millions of dollars of taxpayer money without knowing whether whether the benefit is going to be worth the cost or not. So, and that's something that they're working on now, I think Federal Highways is working on that cost benefit factor analysis along with degradation curves for, you know, different structures, different roadways, depending on where they're at, depending on the amount of precipitation they're expected to get, things of that nature. As Ben said, a lot of this is new and cutting edge, and Federal Highways is figuring it out. And they're figuring it out through the trial and error, through the state agencies and what we're doing. So
One thing I've seen discussed is they refer to it as nature-based solutions. I don't know if you are familiar with that idea. It's, particularly can be effective in coastal areas where you use, different types of vegetation and the way you design, near the coast to better absorb the impacts. But there's a whole document that FHWA has also put out for nature-based solutions in a riverine environment. And this is it's thinking outside the box a little bit for transportation engineers, because it's not necessarily the roadway you're changing. It's the adjacent, especially in Eastern Kentucky, there's very limited places where you can build roads, right? It's hard to build the roads. It's much more expensive to build the roads on the mountainside. So you typically see the roads near the bottom snaking along with the waterway. So are there things we can do differently with the waterways themselves? I would imagine it would require multi-agency cooperation to do any sort of thing like that. But if it's something, yes.
So one of the things that would have to be considered also when it comes to private, the water being diverted on private, storing homes, their individual lives, and ability to get around. And what we're seeing now is there is no water. And where is that water going? And different new infrastructure, is such a way that it is diverting water onto private property. Then that, I know that it is considered, but perhaps we need to recognize that there's going to be more water.
Yeah, every climate model we've seen for Kentucky, indicates we're likely to see more water going forward. Some states that are showing much drier climate. For Kentucky, it's a much wetter. It's kind of the good and the bad. It's good to have water. It's bad to have too much water.
it's not only the cumulative water, it's the extreme precipitation events. In the past, I was talking to Ben about this earlier today. In the past year, I know of a dozen events in the United States where we've had over 10 inches of rain in a single day, and these aren't areas that are coastal areas; these are inland areas. So these are precipitation rates that are normally related to coastal type areas, tropical type air masses. And now what we're encountering is tropical type air masses in the United States.
Yeah, when you mentioned earlier the bridges, I don't think it was 100 KYTC bridges. Many of them were local bridges. In fact, I think the majority of them are local bridges. Yes.
So the main problem I'm seeing is, these storms that these major disasters are 500-year storms or more. I mean, the local drainage is usually only designed on a 2-year or 10-year storm.
Right.
So, I mean, unless we're going to spend a whole bunch of money that's only going to be used occasionally, I personally don't know how we're going to project, what's going to help. Other than what you are saying, looking back and see vulnerable areas that keep getting hit, or maybe aren't getting stabilization because, the slides and so forth.
That's certainly part of the problem, is that what we originally conceived of as being a 500-year event is now beginning to happen more frequently. So that 500-year range is probably not accurate anymore. It may be 100, maybe 50. We're not, it's still to be determined, I suppose.
But one of the problems we also find was outputs of that asset that we put on the highway was one, it's like we designed a vertical structure based on current loads. And things may radically change in the next 10 or 15 years of streams or increasing low going process. And we have no control of the happen of what's being built. And the effect of storm that water drainage and runoff and how that's how that affects our transportation assets.
Most urban areas, they make them, you know, have the same runoff that they pre-developed. I don't know about rural, but I know, you know, that's what the Muskie requires here in Louisville.
I'm not sure what could be done about it, but maybe we should go back and reassess the, you know, the drainage patterns and everything based upon updated, hydrological charts and things, because I was in Iowa and we had 3 500-year floods in the span of 10 years. So, you know, at least we would know where we would have problems if it happened. We may not be able to afford to go and fix everything, but knowledge was the first step.
Yeah, when the FHWA pilot did, Iowa wasn't one of the states, but they were kind of like an extra state that kind of lumped in, maybe they were up to what the peer changes. They're doing a lot of work up there in terms of exactly what you're talking about, flood modeling, and bridge design. I think we got 1 minute left, so if anybody has comment you want to get in before we're finished here. Okay, all right, thank you very much.